Welcome to Buzz Breakdown, the show that takes a deep dive into the topics that everyone's buzzing about. I'm your host, and today we're going to be looking into something that I think is on a lot of people's minds.
Definitely something that grabs the headlines.
Exactly. Plane crashes.
Yeah.
Everyone's a little bit afraid of flying, but we don't often get the full picture of what goes on.
Right. It's more than meets the eye sometimes.
Exactly. And we're going to start with a recent one, the Jeju air crash in South Korea.
Right.
And just to set the stage, this wasn't just, a little fender bender. We're talking about a Boeing 787-800.
A big plane.
Yeah, a pretty modern plane crash landed, caught fire, and tragically, most of the people on board didn't survive.
Tragic, yeah.
And the initial reports suggest a bird strike and possible electrical failure.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because you always hear about bird strikes, but it always seems like it's kind of a minor thing.
It seems like a little ding.
Yeah, can they really bring down a plane? So it's true that bird strikes are way more common than you think.
Really?
Yeah, the FAA reported almost 20,000 in the U.S. alone last year.
Wow.
But they're usually not catastrophic. Modern aircraft engines are actually designed to withstand them, even multiple bird strikes.
Oh, so they're built for that.
Yeah. Think about like the Miracle on the Hudson, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 in 2009.
Yeah.
That was a successful water landing after multiple bird strikes.
So what was different about this Jeju air crash?
Yeah, so one thing is that it seems that the plane skidded on the runway,
Oh.
which suggests that the landing gear wasn't deployed.
Uh,
And so that kind of raises the question of like, okay, did the bird strike trigger like a chain reaction?
oh, so like a cascading failure kind of thing.
A cascading failure, exactly.
That's terrifying.
And then to add to that, there's also the loss of ADS-B data.
Okay, no, what is that?
So ADS-B is a system that transmits the plane's location, altitude, speed, all that stuff.
Okay.
And the fact that that was lost suggests that there may have been serious electrical issues.
So could it be that the bird strike somehow, messed with the electrical system and then that caused a bunch of other problems?
Right, it's like a domino effect,
Yeah.
potentially. It's like this giant puzzle, and they're trying to piece together all the evidence from like the maintenance records to the weather conditions to try to figure out what happened.
Yeah, it reminds me of that military plane crash in Alaska back in 1995.
Right.
That also involved a bird strike. I think it was geese in that case.
Yeah.
And 24 people died.
Hmm.
So even though bird strikes are generally, like you said, something that planes can handle, there have been cases where it really went wrong.
Absolutely. It goes to show that it's rarely just one thing. It's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
And that's why these investigations take time. They involve the NTSB for U.S.-made planes.
Right.
It's a very thorough process. They look at everything.
Have you ever wondered how common bird strikes really are?
Well, we mentioned that 20,000 number.
That's right. That's just in the U.S.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And they cost a lot of money, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, bird strikes cause about $1.5 billion in damage every year.
Wow, it's like a hidden cost of flying. I guess it makes sense, though. Planes are getting quieter. More and more people are flying every year.
Exactly. There's just more planes up in the air, more chances for them to cross paths with birds.
But, statistically, most of those strikes don't actually cause serious damage, right?
Right. Like in the UK last year, they had almost 1,400 bird strikes, but fewer than 100 actually disrupted flights.
It's those rare cases, the really catastrophic ones, that make the headlines and change how we fly.
Right.
Like, remember the Ethiopian Airlines crash in 2019?
Oh, yeah. That was a really tough one. That tragic accident really highlighted the dangers of flawed flight control systems.
And wasn't that also triggered by a bird strike?
Yeah, it's suspected that a bird strike activated the faulty system, which ultimately led to the crash.
So even if a bird strike doesn't directly cause a crash, it can kind of be that first domino.
Exactly. It can be the tipping point. And that's why the investigation into this Jeju air crash is going to be so important.
And it seems like the authorities are taking it very seriously. I read that South Korea is even ordering inspections of all their Boeing 737-800s.
They are. It's a big deal.
Oh.
And it reminds me of how other major crashes have prompted these industry-wide changes.
Yeah, like after the Tenerife airport disaster back in 1977.
Oh, right. That's still the deadliest aviation accident ever.
Right.
2 Boeing 747s collided on a foggy runway.
583 people died. It's hard to even fathom.
It's hard to imagine. And that accident led to major improvements in communication protocols and ground radar systems.
Wow. And of course, we can't forget about the Lockerbie bombing in 1988.
A terrorist attack that changed airport security forever.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that aviation safety faces threats from all sides. It's not just about technology and mechanics.
Exactly. There are so many factors at play. Even what might seem like a minor incident can be pivotal for safety. Like that Aloha Airlines flight 243 back in 1988.
What happened there?
Part of the fuselage actually ripped off mid-flight.
Whoa,
Yeah, it was due to metal fatigue.
that's scary.
It was. Miraculously, most of the passengers survived. But it really exposed those underlying maintenance issues and led to a lot of safety improvements.
So from bird strikes to entire industry overhauls, we've seen how these crashes can have ripple effects that go far beyond the initial incident.
Every crash, big or small, teaches us something new.
It's like they're forcing us to constantly rethink how we approach aviation safety.
And that's a good thing, because
Yeah.
the goal is always to make flying safer for everyone.
Absolutely. But, we've talked a lot about the planes themselves, but what about the people flying them?
You mean the pilots?
Yeah, they're ultimately the ones making those critical decisions up in the air. What kind of pressures are they dealing with?
That's a great question, and one we should definitely explore further. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to uncover about this fascinating and complex world of aviation safety.
You're right. There's a whole human element to this that we need to unpack.
And we'll do just that right after a quick break. So you're right about the pilots. They're the ones up there making those split-second decisions that can mean the difference between a safe landing and tragedy.
Exactly. And we've all heard those stories about pilot error, but I imagine it's way more complicated than just someone making a mistake.
Oh, absolutely. It's a high-pressure environment up there. Imagine you're responsible for hundreds of lives.
Yeah, no pressure.
Right. You're flying this massive machine at hundreds of miles per hour, thousands of feet in the air, and you have to constantly monitor instruments, communicate with air traffic control, deal with weather changes.
Oh, and let's not forget turbulence. I hate that feeling.
Yeah, turbulence can definitely add to this stress. And on top of all that, you have to make these split-second decisions, sometimes with incomplete information.
And I imagine fatigue is a huge factor too, especially on those long-haul flights.
Absolutely. Fatigue is a major concern in aviation. When you're sleep deprived, your reaction time slows down, your decision-making ability is impaired, you're just more prone to making errors.
It's like trying to drive a car when you're exhausted. You know it's not a good idea, but sometimes you just have to push through it.
Right, except the stakes are much higher when you're piloting a plane. And it's not just about physical fatigue either.
Oh, you mean like mental fatigue?
Exactly.
Right.
That kind of fatigue that builds up over time from the constant stress and demands of the job.
It's like burnout, right? You hear about that in so many professions these days.
And it's definitely a concern for pilots, too. Then there's the whole issue of communication.
Yes. Making sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. Clear and concise communication between the pilots, air traffic control, even the ground crew is essential for safety.
Especially when you're in a fast-moving environment like that with multiple aircraft in close proximity. One little miscommunication could have huge consequences.
Absolutely. And it's not always about the words themselves either. Tone of voice, cultural differences in communication styles, even just background noise can all lead to misinterpretations.
It's like that game of telephone we played as kids, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, except the consequences are a lot more serious than a silly misheard phrase.
For sure. So we've got fatigue, we've got communication breakdowns. Are there any other human factors that contribute to these accidents?
Well, with all the advances in technology, there's this new challenge emerging: automation complacency.
Automation complacency. Okay, I've never heard of that before. What is it?
It's basically when pilots become so reliant on automated systems that their own skills and situational awareness can start to decline.
Oh, I see. Because they're so used to the computer doing most of the work.
Exactly. They might not be as sharp when it comes to handling those unexpected situations because they haven't had to do it as much manually.
Kind of like when you rely too much on your GPS while driving.
Yeah, good analogy. You might miss those important road signs or changes in traffic conditions because you're not paying as close attention.
Right. You just assume the GPS will tell you everything you need to know.
So it's a real challenge for the aviation industry to find that right balance between leveraging technology to enhance safety and also making sure that pilots stay engaged and sharp, ready to take control when they need to.
Right. Because at the end of the day, it's still a human behind the controls.
Exactly. And that human element is always going to be a factor in aviation safety.
So we've talked about bird strikes, we've talked about cascading failures, we've even touched on geopolitics, and now these human factors. It's clear that there's no single cause for these crashes. It's always this complex web of contributing factors.
Absolutely. It's a systems problem. And it's why those investigations are so important. They're not just about assigning blame, they're about understanding all the different pieces of the puzzle and how they interact.
And how can we learn from these incidents to make air travel even safer going forward? What are those key takeaways?
Well, I think one of the biggest lessons is that we need to take this holistic approach to safety. We can't just focus on those individual risks in isolation. We have to look at the whole picture and understand how all these different factors can interact and potentially amplify each other.
Right, because even something seemingly small can be the tipping point.
Exactly. And that's why those investigations are so thorough. They try to uncover all those potential weaknesses in the system.
So it's about learning from our mistakes and using that knowledge to improve things for the future.
Absolutely. And another key takeaway is that aviation safety is never really finished. It's this ongoing process of continuous improvement.
So it's not just about fixing the problems we know about, it's about anticipating new challenges and always striving to be better.
Exactly. We're constantly learning new things, developing new technologies, refining our understanding of those human factors.
So it's like the aviation industry is always trying to stay one step ahead of potential risks.
You could say that, but we can't do it alone. This brings us to another really crucial point. Collaboration. Collaboration?
Yeah. Aviation safety isn't just the responsibility of pilots and airlines. It involves everyone. Air traffic controllers, regulators, manufacturers, maintenance crews, even the researchers.
Oh, so everyone involved in the industry has a role to play.
Everyone. It's a shared responsibility. And by working together, sharing information, learning from each other's experiences, we can make flying safer for everyone.
Speaking of sharing information, earlier you mentioned a historical incident that you thought our listeners might find interesting.
Oh, yeah. It's a fascinating case that really shows how even those seemingly minor events can have this huge impact on safety.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So it all started back in 1973 with a flight from Bristol to Basel.
1973, Bristol to Basel. What happened? Was it like a hijacking or something?
Nope, nothing like that.
Huh.
The plane, a Vickers Vanguard, crashed into a hillside near Hochwald, Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 108 out of the 145 passengers and crew died.
That's awful. But you were saying this shows how even minor events can be a big deal for safety.
What do you mean?
Well, the investigation found this kind of perfect storm of factors.
Okay.
The weather wasn't great. Low clouds, some turbulence. The plane was a little overloaded too.
Still within limits, though, right?
Yeah, still within the allowed limits. But then there was the approach path.
Okay.
They were using a VOR.
Oh, like a radio beacon?
Exactly. It guides the plane towards the beacon.
Yeah, I know about those.
But the one they were using had a slight offset. So the beacon wasn't exactly where they thought it was.
Oh, so they were being let off course a little. And because of the weather, they couldn't actually see where they were going?
That's it. They were flying blind, trusting the instrument.
Oh, wow.
And that tiny difference, plus the other stuff, the weather, the weight, it all added up.
Yeah. It's scary how those little things can become huge problems.
It really shows how important it is to look at the whole system, not just one thing at a time.
It all connects. So we've talked about so much today, from that recent Jeju air crash to all these historical incidents, and the human side of things, too.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
And it seems like every crash teaches us something new.
It does, no matter how big or small. And it shows how committed the industry is to getting better and better.
Absolutely. But we can't forget that we all have a role to play in this.
That's so true.
Passengers, we need to know the safety stuff.
Yeah.
People in the industry need to keep pushing for new ideas and working together.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been an incredible look into the world of plane crashes. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure being here.
And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in to Buzz Breakdown. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next one. We'll see you next time.